This story happened around October of last year. I spent the night at my grandparents' home. That evening, everything seemed to be going relatively normally. We ate my grandmother's delicious steak, watched TV, and then looked at some old photos. When night came around, I went to the guest bedroom, which had been my room before when we used to live with them. At around 2 o'clock, I put my laptop up to play some music as I got ready for bed so that I might doze off. Now, let me tell you, there were a few paranormal occurrences when we used to live there, but I wouldn't characterize any of them as horrible or frightening. For instance, I've always been a light sleeper and would wake up if someone even walked quietly on the wooden floors outside of my room. This happened a few times, waking up to soft footsteps in the hallway by my room, but my grandparents assuring me later that they were not up at all. One time I even went to check, but all the doors were closed and nobody seemed to be awake. Anyway, the general layout of my room was slightly odd compared to other rooms. There was a corner in this room which led to a small hallway before you reached the entrance door, so from the bed you couldn't see the door, only the small hallway leading to the door. I must have dozed off pretty quickly, though, because I woke up suddenly without even remembering falling asleep. It was around 4 in the morning and I felt extremely tired. This was a little unusual because every time I'd wake up in the middle of the night, I'd usually feel pretty awake and good, which was often the reason for my body waking me up. But this time, I was really tired. I didn't hear anything that woke me up, but since I was so tired, I knew I hadn't just woken up on my own. I looked in the direction of the short hallway with my half-opened eyes. Seeing nothing, although it was dark, I put my head back on the pillow and closed my eyes. I laid for a few minutes in silence, on the brink of sleep, before I heard the awful sound of my bedroom door closing. My eyes shot open, and I raised my body up from the pillow, staring into the empty darkness of the hallway. I must have been frozen in that position for a whole minute before I got out of bed and went over to the door. Nothing was there, but I knew something was not right. I always kept the door shut, so who opened it? The thought made me shiver, and I quickly locked the door, then hopped back in bed. I told myself that it must have been one of my grandparents, though I couldn't come up with a reason for them opening and closing my door. Trying to forget it, I closed my eyes again and laid silently. Just as I did, loud, running footsteps came from outside the room, coming towards the door. They sounded like heavy, barefoot steps, stopping abruptly at the room door. I waited, completely horrified and in a total state of shock. A few long, anxious seconds passed before I again heard the door aggressively slam shut. This time, having seen the door already closed not even a minute prior and never hearing it open, I was stuck in a panic. My heart was beating rapidly, and yet I felt like I was too scared to move. I stayed sitting up in my bed all night until morning. I hadn't told my grandparents so as to not frighten them and instead just made an excuse to leave early and head home. A few months later, though, I was sleeping over at a friend's place, trying to fall asleep while lying on the floor. My eyes closed and my body facing away from the door. I heard it again, the door closing, but this time softly. I looked over at my friend, but he was already sound asleep and hadn't heard a thing when I asked him in the morning. Surprisingly, I haven't heard it since then, and I've never heard it in my own home. I have virtually no idea what I've been experiencing, but I have a very strong feeling that I'm being watched by a paranormal entity. I still don't understand the significance of the already closed door closing again, but I would really appreciate it if someone could explain it to me or even share with me a method to get rid of it. Because even still today, I lay in bed paranoid every night, fearing that get rid of it. Because even still today, I lay in bed paranoid every night, fearing that I may wake up to something horrible. I moved into a small apartment building last summer. It was a cheap 2-bedroom place and was really my only option considering my low-paying job I had at the time. The building was very clearly not well taken care of, and neither was the room. There was a buildup of mold in several areas, and the place honestly just looked like it was falling apart. Of all these things, though, the one thing that stood out the most was the lack of other residents. I'd lived in a couple apartment complexes before moving into this one, and rarely would a room even be available. However, at this place, almost all of the rooms were still available for rent. It was a small complex with only 8 rooms, but during the time I was there, only 2 rooms were occupied, mine and an older couple's on the first floor. My room was on the 3rd floor, leaving the middle and top floor completely empty, but those floors never truly felt empty. Having lived there for a month at the time, I'd heard on multiple occasions people talking below me. I always believed it was just the older couple, as they were the only ones living below me, though strangely, I'd only ever hear a woman's voice, never a man's, and to make things stranger, I'd be able to hear them pretty clearly, even though they were 2 stories below me. It would always sound as though the woman was muttering to themselves indistinctly. It would give me the creeps sometimes when I would wake up and hear the woman muttering to herself below me. But I thought perhaps she was sleepwalking, and maybe the vents to my room were connected to theirs, allowing for the sound to travel. But everything only got worse as time went on. 2 months in, with nobody else moved in still, I was walking up the stairs to my room, and as I walked past the 2nd floor, I noticed a door to one of the rooms was open. My curiosity got the better of me, and I took a couple steps towards the doorway to look inside. It was dark and empty, which is exactly what you'd expect of a vacant room. But I got a really bad feeling the closer I got to the doorway, and ended up just continuing upstairs to my room. Later that night, though, I was taking the trash down and noticed the door was closed. It was definitely weird, but I didn't know what to really think. I knew nobody lived there, so what could it even be? Maybe the owner of the building was working on the room or something. That was the only thing I could think of anyway. That night, I went to bed early with a clear mind, but woke up sometime in the middle of the night, hearing the woman muttering below me again. Having seen the door below me opened earlier, I was more curious about the mysterious woman this time. I got out of bed, being sure not to make much noise, and leaned my ear against the cold wooden floorboards. Listening, her indistinct mumbling sounded close, but was also more of a whisper. I knew there was no way a whisper could sound so close if it was coming from the old couple's room on the 1st floor. At that moment, realizing this, I began to get nervous. Part of me wanted to go downstairs to see if the door was open again, but I knew I was way too fearful to do that. Now, sitting in bed again thinking, I started to hear the woman walking around slowly, still talking to herself. It seemed like she was just walking in random patterns in the room below me. After a few minutes, though, she stopped very suddenly. It's safe to say I was terrified, and the woman suddenly going silent almost made it worse, as I no longer knew where she was or what she was doing. But this night would go on to be far more fear-inducing. I sat in bed wide awake for 30 minutes, beginning to wonder if the woman had somehow quietly left, or was possibly just standing in the spot for the past half hour. Either way, I was too scared to sleep. And that's when I heard the floor creaking again, as someone was walking slowly across the floor. However, this time it was coming from above me. Soft creaks in the floor slowly made their way through the upstairs room before stopping directly above my bed. Several seconds of terrifying silence passed before the woman's soft whispering came from above me. Then they let out one loud, aching scream, almost sounding as if it were right in front of my face, before the room fell silent again. I was basically in tears, holding my head and trying not to completely freak out, but how could I not? I stayed up until dawn, then made arrangements with my family to stay with them for a while. I paid a fee to end my lease and moved in with my parents while I looked for a new place. The only time I went back was to move my stuff into the moving truck, and as I loaded up one of the last boxes, the old couple came out to say goodbye. I hadn't ever really talked to them aside from simple greetings when we were going in or out, but they strangely seemed to be really sad that I was leaving. I'm not sure if they ever experienced anything that I had, but the only thing I could focus on during our brief conversation was how distinct the old lady's accent was, and that it sounded nothing at all like the woman I heard mumbling. Nothing at all like the woman I heard mumbling. After that, I didn't know what to think, other than how glad I was to be moving out. This happened several years ago, back in March of 2002. My friend, who I will call Jake for privacy reasons, invited me on a long weekend trip to a remote cabin that his uncle owned in northern Saskatchewan, and I agreed to join him, so we drove the long 6 hours from my house to get there. Let me give you a brief layout of the grounds before we continue. It was a small, single-story, ranch-style cabin with a kitchen, one bedroom, one bathroom, and a living room. There was no electricity or running water, and it was surrounded by forest on all sides. The only way in or out was down a long, unpaved driveway. We arrived at the cabin around dusk. The next day, Jake and I walked around the forest to search for some firewood, and about an hour into the walk, Jake spotted an abandoned house out in the distance. It was nestled among a group of trees, and this was rather strange as we were in the middle of northern Saskatchewan and civilization was miles away. Jake wanted to check out the house out of curiosity, and although I was hesitant to go inside, I reluctantly joined him. We entered through a boarded-up window. Once inside, we were greeted with a musty smell. As we were roaming around, I noticed a door that headed into the basement. Curiosity got the better of me, and against my better judgment, I opened the door and slowly made my way down the steps. Once I reached the bottom, I froze. There were dimly lit candles in a circular pattern as if someone was performing some kind of satanic ritual. I pointed our flashlight across the basement to see if someone was hiding, but no one was there. After doing some exploring, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. Under the stairs, which had been cleared just moments before, there was a black figure staring directly at me. It looked to be at least 8 feet tall. And once I saw its eyes, I knew I was in the presence of something inhuman. A pair of glowing red eyes stared back at me full of hatred and malice. I then heard a low, repulsive growling, and without hesitation, I bolted up the stairs. Jake was still exploring the empty dining room and heard me coming up the stairs. "We need to get out of here." We left through the same way we entered. Our story, however, does not end there. When we finally returned to the cabin, I told Jake everything about what I saw, and to my surprise, he believed me. I didn't see anything myself, but the moment we entered that place, I felt that something evil lived there. We decided to put the whole thing behind us and get some rest. I suddenly woke up and checked the time on my watch, and it said 2:17 a.m. Things were dark and quiet, but I felt that something was amiss. After a while, I heard subtle footsteps outside the bedroom door. This was also when Jake woke up as well. "What's going on?" I told him to be quiet and listen. The footsteps became louder, and I got up from my bed and made my way over to the bedroom door. I then cracked it to see what was outside. Chills were sent through my body as there was an intruder in the cabin in the far corner of the living room. But it was not human. It was that same creature that I'd seen in the basement of that abandoned house. The moonlight did not provide adequate illumination, but I saw the disturbing form twist its head until its red eyes were looking back at the bedroom door. Or should I say me? I slammed the door shut, locking it in a panic. We both fled the cabin through the bedroom window, leaving all of our belongings behind. As we ran towards Jake's truck, we both heard a loud, ear-piercing scream. Jake frantically started the truck and floored it out of there. We remained silent the whole way home, not saying a word about what we saw. It's been nearly 20 years since this event, and Jake and I are still friends to this day, but we never returned to his uncle's cabin since. I don't know if what we saw that night was some kind of paranormal entity or an unknown creature living in the woods, but I don't plan nor care to find out.